Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Our next speaker is going to be MKultra. He is a longtime researcher in the field of the ancient astronaut theory, has a lot of knowledge specifically with ancient texts related to the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and is a very large advocate of a researcher named Zecharia Sitchin. And he's been studying with Zecharia Sitchin. He's traveled the world and seen many of these places that we talk about in the ancient astronaut theory. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome MKultra to the stage.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you to UFO Stream for hosting, introducing this lecture, and all of you for coming today. The first thing you see here is, of course, that's me, MKultra. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a stockbroker and a life insurance agent. And of course, my true love is doing this research into our true history, the history of where our civilization comes from, what really happened on planet Earth, and what kind of material, or what kind of information we have not been told. We just heard a lecture of some of the most modern stuff that's going on most recently, stuff that our military is possibly holding back from the culture and the population. This lecture is going to stress most of the ancient stuff that's in museums all over the world. Anybody can see it for themselves. And the emphasis is on how it got into our culture and how it became known to us. This certificate I got from Zecharia after going to several weekend-long seminars that I'm one of the seminar coordinators, so we had full weekend seminars. Zecharia wanted to give people the knowledge and ability to do lectures on their own and to give them experience and get a good basis in the material, and then conduct lectures and then go out into different areas and talk about this stuff. So along with the lectures that or the weekends I've done with Zecharia, I've been to England, Malta, Italy, and Mexico with him. On my own, I traveled to Egypt, Israel, and other ancient sites. Usually when I go on vacations, it's not on the beach to lay back and relax. I usually explore pyramids or ancient tombs or museums and sites like that. Here you see a picture of Zecharia, and for those of you that are not familiar, I'll explain what his work is embodied in his basic theory. This is a picture from the British Museum in London, which was in our trip in 1999. He's pointing at a tablet that shows many of the zodiac symbols that we're all familiar with today. Zechariah's first book was called The 12th Planet. It was published in 1976 after about 30 years of research. Currently, Zecharia has about 13 books that have been published in over 24 different languages. He's a bestseller in almost every country that he's in, and he sold over 24 million books. For those unfamiliar with the theory, the basic concept is simple. Most, if not all, of a lot of the things that we are familiar with, including biblical stories, timekeeping, record-keeping, counting systems, and a whole bunch of things that you will see are all been borrowed and inherited from older cultures. In some cases, the first culture. And when I say the first culture, I mean the first culture that left thousands or hundreds of thousands of tablets in writing. And for thousands of years, these things have been carried down, and still we maintain them in our civilization today. They are the earliest influences and the first occurrences of these things that we're going to find, and you'll see how they still play a part in our civilization today. Of course, who's talking about it and where they come from, we're going to see, and we're going to be looking at the specific data of what it looks like. Most of the original source material is from a culture called the Sumerians, which existed from 2000 BC to about approximately 4000 BC. And when I say that time frame is based on the writing and the tablets that were found, we're going to see in a moment how we know how old these tablets and these writings are. These are what the Sumerian people look like. There's no pictures of gods here. This is the King Gudea, the final Sumerian king of the Third Empire period. All of these are individual citizens of Sumeria. They're usually depicted in a devotion position with their hands like this, to their gods, giving reverence. Their civilization produced almost 1 million tablets, and they were, well, you're going to see what they look like when they're found, but they recorded almost everything possible. Any transaction between people, I sold you some sheep, we traded some barley, they recorded this on a tablet that exists even to today. Along with those kind of recordings, the king would record what he wanted to say. They would record the mythological stories. They would have festivals and things were read. And so for thousands of years, these stories and this knowledge was around and maintained in form that would not disappear. Most of the tablets are found in this area that we are all familiar with these days. Iraq, the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, the cradle of civilization. The oldest civilizations and oldest cities is down here at the bottom, Eridu, which is the prototype of the word earth. Here we see Uruk and Babylon, Baghdad, Babylon, some famous cities from the old days. The Persian-Iranian Empire is here. Ashur, up here, Nimrod, a famous king. So we're talking about empires that were ruling the Middle East and the Near East areas from, well, as far back as 4000 BC, up until the time when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. So we're talking about a 3,000 to 4,000 year period of these people who were dominating the area, their stories, their culture, and everything else that they produced, their methods of recording, of distributing information. In every way, they touched the lives of the people who lived in the areas, plus the future generations. Okay. This is called types of data. Now, this is what we're going to be looking at. Class 1 data is what we're going to be seeing today. Class 1 data is verifiable and scientific evidence. It means it's physical. There is something to touch, there is something to see, there is something to study. It may be in a museum, it may be behind a piece of glass, but the archaeologist touched it. The person who dug it out of the ground found it, cleaned it up, recorded it, discovered it, made a description of it, and now it's on display. So it doesn't mean that we personally have to touch it, but some human has to have seen it or touched it. So what I have here, most of the reports that we're going to see is called here a Class 1 data once removed. That means I'm given a report on Class 1 data that I studied, or somebody in a book studied it, and we're reporting it today, because we're obviously not going from museum to museum. Class 2 data is, there's no evidence left to study, but multiple witnesses saw it. The example I give here is a shooting star. Another example would be a UFO experience. Many people see a UFO, there's nothing left. Each of those people know what they saw, but you can't tell people that were in a different city, oh, this is what I saw. They'll either believe you or not. It's based on their trust and faith in you as a witness. Type 3 data. It's only one person who saw it. There's nothing left to study. Guess where most of the material for UFO contact cases or UFO witness sightings are? Is type 3. But you know what else is a type 3? Religious testimony. Biblical documents. Biblical stories which were recorded thousands of years or hundreds of years or decades after events. No evidence left, just written on a scroll. That's what most of religious testimony is. So the problem is, in the case of UFOs, everybody wants the physical evidence to study. In the case of religious testimony, we would also like to see physical evidence to convince us. But that's just not what happens in the reality. So we have to weigh different types of data and determine which is stronger and which is a stronger form to add to our belief, take away, or to give us knowledge that we use for our daily life to benefit us or not. Okay, these are actually a museum full of tablets. This is in a museum in Turkey. And this is what this evidence is that we're looking at. When I show you text from stories or copies, and I'm saying reading the story, which we'll see, this is where the story was found. On clay or stone tablets, found in digs and under the ground all over the Middle East, mostly in Iraq, but also in Syria and Turkey. This is from a library museum in Turkey, and this is what archaeologists dug up. Occasionally they would dig up a whole library, and on the first tablet would be a list of everything that's on the library shelf, and they would say, oh, this is what's supposed to be on this shelf. If a tablet was missing, they could go look for it. Maybe someone had checked it out. Checked it out thousands of years ago. So these are the originals. We are talking about looking at the original form, the original recording of the stories and the data that we're going to be talking about. This is not a piece of paper like this that won't exist in 1,000 years, and who knows what will happen to this piece of paper. It'll crumble into dust. These tablets, if they're not blown up by bombs, if they're not destroyed by, walls caving in or earthquakes. These originals will exist literally forever. And these are the originals that the scribe wrote. As I said, they found almost 1 million of these type of tablets. Only a certain percentage of them are going to cover mythological stories and things that we're familiar with. Most of them would be transactions. This is a slide. This is from one of Zechariah Sitchin's books, which shows the progression of pictographic writing into the cuneiform script. This is one of the ways we know how old something is. The first form of writing, which is pure pictographic, is a picture like this. That's the oldest form of Sumerian. Later on, the scribes determined that it's easy to turn some of the pictures sideways for the ease of writing them and recording them. Now, what they're doing is they're taking a wet piece of clay, they're using a stylus, and they're chiseling in it and etching on it, and therefore, they wanted to make it easier. Eventually, it becomes cuneiform script. But what I want to point out is a few of the things that are here that we're all familiar with. First of all, the first one here is the earth. Ki, that's the Sumerian word for earth. The earth is not shown round. The earth is shown oval like an egg shape, which is more similar to the way the earth really is in a pure circle form. And for thousands of years, the Greeks and other cultures thought that the circle was the most perfect form. But the oldest depiction of earth in the pictographic was not even shown round. Here we have the word for kor is mountain. In Hebrew, kor, mountain is har. So kor becomes har. And we're going to see a progression of how languages and slight sound variations occur. Thousands of years, vowels change, consonants slightly change, and words morph from one type into another, but the same meaning occurs. This is the word for man, Lu. Lu is still a man's name, even today. The root form of Louis. Lulu, which is somebody that's mixed up, or something that is mixed up, is also a Sumerian term. They use the word Lulu Amelo, which means mixed up being. That was how they described humans. And that was from the source of their creation story of how we were created. So Lulu's been a term that's meant crazy or mixed up for literally as long as language has existed. So when we see tablets in this form, we know it's older than this form. When the writing is like this, it's younger than this. Something older can be an influence to something newer. Something newer cannot be an influence to something older. The arrow of time moves only one direction. Now this is the period of time of writing that we find. Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform writing is the oldest type of writing found where we have complete versions for. There's writing called Linear A, Linear B, there's Indus Valley script, but there's not a lot of tablets left to decipher. We're talking in this body of knowledge of complete thousands to hundreds of thousands of tablets, huge bodies of material and data to study. So Sumero-Akkadian comes first. This is pre-3000 BC. Egyptian hieroglyphics is later at about 3000. Then we get here. This is the period of Abraham right here. The period of Jesus is here. Jesus and his followers spoke Aramaic. That's down here. That's already many generations after the original languages. So we're going to see how languages that we're using words here follow and all the way down here from Phoenician, which by the way, the Bible, which is written in Hebrew, the letters, the names and the sounds of the letters are Phoenician, okay? And that's going to become some of the Old Hebrew. Later on, the shapes of the letters are going to become Aramaic shapes, but they're still going to be speaking some old languages and speaking and using the words from old languages. Anybody's language can be written on earth with anybody else's character set. You can write the language English with Italian letters or French letters. Everybody's character set contains the sounds that we make with our mouth. So it's just a matter of connecting the original sources and where the words started from. And it's not that hard to find once you've dug up all of the original source material. This is from the book by Samuel Noah Kramer, one of Zechariah's mentors, who wrote many books and did a lot of translating, and he's passed away a few decades ago. This book is called History Begins at Sumer, and this is some of the stories and information that you find in some of these tablets that I just showed you the pictures of. These are the first occurrences in history and the oldest versions of these stories and type of information. In this case, the first time schools are ever found. The first case of a government, and they found a bicameral Congress. That's the kind of Congress we have. That's a two-party Congress that's arguing and discussing, to go to war or what to do with taxes and stuff like that. The first case of keeping histories, historians. The first law codes, justice codes. The first medicines, agriculture, horticulture. Social reforms, philosophies, and cosmogony and cosmology. That means the first time they are trying to explain where the solar system comes from, where humans come from, where we come from, how we were created, how everything existed. The first time these things are recorded, we're going to see a few of those examples of, and those are found in these tablets. And some of the familiar things, for example, the first Job, a character whose God gives him a lot of bad luck and bad stuff happens to him. The first proverbs and sayings. Sumerian proverbs are very funny. One of them is, man, for his pleasure, marriage. I'm thinking it over, divorce. Another proverb is, a rich man can't sleep at night, but a poor man can. In referencing that a rich man is always worried about things, and so to be poor may not be so bad. Okay, other things we find. This is the second page of the table of contents of these first occurrences. The first biblical parallels. That means stories like Noah, like resurrection, that we see copies of in the Bible. And in some cases, we're going to see specific lines that were borrowed, or just themes of stories that were borrowed. All of these occurring many thousands of years before the biblical literature was written down. Man's first heroic age, the first library catalogs, the first golden age, a time when everything was wonderful on the earth and everything was peaceful and the gods ruled. A very common theme in ancient civilizations is to remember a golden age when everything was wonderful. The first messiahs. In the old days, the ideal messiah was a hero king who rose up your people against the evil empire that was conquering you and freed your people. It wasn't like the Messiah miracles of Jesus that we think of today. The ideal Messiah in the old days was a different concept of mostly the hero king that saves the civilization. The first chants, also the first lullaby. That's the first time in history that a mother is singing to her baby to put the baby to sleep. And those things are recorded as well. So we have so much material that's found in these old tablets that it's just an incredible amount of knowledge. This is another slide from Zechariah's books, which talks about the mathematical system that the Sumerians had, and it was called sexagesimal. Now we are told that we use a decimal system, which means we use base 10. 10 times 10 is 100. We have 10 fingers, we have 10 toes. But that's not really the system we use today. We actually use the sexagesimal system, and it doesn't seem to make sense. It's 10 times 6, it's 6 times 10. It seems kind of strange. Well, 6 times 10 is 60. That's how many seconds there are in a minute, 60 seconds. 60 minutes is in an hour. Anytime you see a division of 6, it comes from the Sumerian sexagesimal system. How many hours in a day? 24 is 4 times 6. In the old days, they used to call them double hours, and they were listed as 12 times double hours. Degrees in a circle is 360. That's 6 times 60. That's also Sumerian. Now let's talk about the number 12. 2 times 6. Months in a year, 12. Disciples of Jesus, 12. Tribes of Israel, 12. Olympian gods, 12. Anytime that you see 12, it has a remnant from the sexagesimal system. And in a college textbook, you will see that it's not the Sumerians that left us this mathematical system. They'll say it's the Babylonians. And then in one line it'll say, well, the Babylonians inherited it from the Sumerians. I'm still waiting for the textbooks to update it. Now, for example, how many bagels or donuts do you buy when you go to the baker? Does anybody here know how to call a group of 10 and tell the baker they want a group of 10 bagels or donuts? Nobody? It's a deca. Tell the guy you want a deca of donuts. He will be like, what? I know a dozen and I know a baker's dozen. What's a deca? That's what we would actually use if we use base 10. We would be buying 10 bagels or 10 donuts, but we still use dozen even today. And of course 12 inches in a foot, and it just goes on and on and on. Whenever you see division of 12 or 60, something is divisible like that, you will see it's a sexagesimal remnant left over. Now why is that so significant? When they used this method of counting, it left them with the ability to calculate gigantic numbers, which we will see, which they should not have been able to deal with. Part of those numbers have to do with the zodiac. The zodiac is another Sumerian invention. That means using the sky and using animals to depict divisions in the sky to keep track of time. The zodiac actually keeps track of precession. Well, let's just talk about the specific names. This is from When Time Began, a book by Zechariah Sitchin. Guana was the heavenly bull. They were the ones that came up with the name and used the symbol of the bull. Mashtaba's twins. Absin, whose father was Sin, that was the maiden Virgo. She never got married. Girtab is the claw of the cutter, Scorpio. Gu, the Lord of Waters, the water bearer, Aquarius. This is the age that we're coming into, the age of Aquarius. All of the zodiac, the Sumerians came up with first, which is incredible because we usually think of it as the Greeks coming up with it, but that's not true. It was identified much earlier. But to keep the zodiac time and to understand it, you have to be keeping time on a gigantic astronomical level. It is keeping track of cycles that are 2160 years of each cycle. The age of Taurus. Everything in Egypt at the time had bulls at this time. When they switched to the age of Aries, everything in Egypt had rams. In the Jewish religion, they use a ram's horn to blow on certain holidays, the age of Aries. Pisces is the age of the fish. A lot of people have a symbol of Jesus on their car and they have a fish. It's not because there was a fisherman involved in the story. It's because Jesus was coming at the beginning of the age of Pisces. That's actually a pagan type of description of the age that Jesus came. And pagan only means pre-Christian. So the Sumerians, for some reason, in 3000 BC to the 3000 BC, knew about precession, knew about the zodiacal ages, named them, identified them, and we still use them today. Which is, you're going to see how incredible this is. Okay, this is from the University of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, from the museum. I've copied this myself. This is from a book by the Professor H.P. Hillcraft. Zechariah shows references into his books of this material as well. I want to find the original myself, and so when I found it, I added it to my slide presentation. What you're seeing is a multiplication table. Well, actually, it's a division table. But here's what the Sumerians are dividing. This is found in the Temple of Nippur, or the Nippurian Library. They're taking this number. This is 195 trillion, 955 billion, 200 million. And they're dividing this number downward. They're dividing it by 768,000 to get this number that's 255 million. And they don't show you the work. They just show you the answer. What the heck is somebody doing in 3000 BC calculating the number of 195 trillion? Are they trying to figure out how big our national debt is going to be in a few thousand years? Are they trying to figure out how far distance is to a star or a planet? I didn't even think it started using trillions in my concept until I heard about the national debt possibly getting there. This is a tablet where this is the starting number. They're not starting small and counting up. They're starting at the highest number and dividing it down to the lowest possible number, which it just blows me away. This is from the same mathematical or division tablets, where here the starting number is 12,960,000. Now that number actually makes sense. That's 3,600 squared. So that's fitting their mathematical sexagesimal system. But there's something else that this number does. It is also, when you divide this number by 500, what you get right here is precession. The amount of exact years in the complete zodiacal cycle of precession. So now precession is when the Earth spins and it wobbles, okay? So every time a new age occurs, allegedly in the rising of the spring equinox, you'll have a different animal or background zodiac. That total cycle is 25,920 years. They recorded it first. In any history book, they will say that Hipparchus, one of the Greeks, was the first to discover precession. This is 2,000 years earlier. And here it is listed. If you guys calculate on a calculator, 2160 is each zodiacal age, times 12 is 25,920. But once again, they didn't count upward. They had this as a starting number, and they divided it downward to get to this, along with all these other numbers. For some reason, they had no problem dealing with gigantic numbers, and they were dividing them downward. And so here we see evidence of a mathematical system that we still use, knowledge of the zodiac, knowledge of precession, which is in such giant time frames. The question is, how could a civilization know it that is that old, so ancient? Well, they will tell you in the text everything that they learned from their gods. They didn't create it. The king didn't take credit for it. In a lot of ancient tablets, the king is taking credit for the victory in the battle, or building a canal, or creating whatever benefit for the people. In this situation, they are saying we learned it from our gods. Okay, you can't see this one very good, so I better read this out to you. Okay, this is a dim slide. Every one of the rulers that was one of these gods ruled for a certain amount of years, and the amount of years was a division of 3,600. Alulim ruled for 8 cycles of 3,600. He ruled for 28,800 years. Al-Algar ruled for this, 38,000 years. And this was Enmenluana, 43,200 years, which, by the way, is another precessional cycle number. So every time they mentioned the amount of years that one of their gods was a ruler of, the time frame, it was always a multiple of 3,600. Now we're going to see in the slide why 3,600. It's because of them. The tablets talk about the gods saying they come from a certain planet, this planet that's called Nibiru, the planet of crossing. It's also known as Planet X, the 10th planet, and it's also called Marduk. There's many names for it in history. The oldest form of the name is Nibiru, okay, from the Sumerian words. So what's happening, as Zechariah has shown, is that each of these rulers ruled based on the orbital period, which, by the way, this is an average orbital period, of this planet that these gods said they came from. That's why all of them have years that match those cycles. So when they would change, when one god would retire or the next commander would come in, it would be based on the orbit of this planet. Now, of course, when a professional archaeologist or somebody who doesn't accept extraterrestrials or aliens won't believe these years, well, how could somebody be ruling for 28,000 years? It makes no sense. But if you are natural to a planet whose orbital period is longer than us, then your life cycle could be naturally 100 orbits of that planet. If that planet takes 3,600 years to orbit, you could have a 360,000 year lifespan compared to us. To them, they live 100 orbits. And it's not that, it's simply not that much time frame when you take relativity into consideration. I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, this is a cylinder seal that has astronomical information, and notice here is Saturn with rings on it. This is the only ancient depiction I can find that shows Saturn with its rings, but it also shows something else. First of all, they're drinking beer through a big straw. They didn't use glasses or cups the way we do. This is the first time kegs are shown in history, by the way. They used to there was 250 recipes of beer found in Sumerian records or more. And they drank it through a big straw, and they drank it seated. Now here's the Earth and the Moon. Here's Venus. Here's Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. Now they don't usually show the planets to scale. So don't think in terms, well, Jupiter should be so much bigger than that. Most of the time the planets are not shown to scale. But what is between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt right now. That's what's interesting about this, besides the fact that Saturn is shown. So we know somebody had a little bit more information than they should have. To see Saturn's rings, you needed binoculars with at least 10 power to 12 power or a telescope. In our history, in Western civilization, it was the 15 and 1600s when telescopes and binoculars, telescopes, microscopes were invented. So this is showing something that could not have been seen by primitive people without optics, and yet it's depicted here. And the asteroid belt, which is between Mars and Jupiter, is shown where the straw is. Now, if the straw was somewhere else, I wouldn't bring it up. But it is interesting that the straw is shown here with an angle, and the angle is important because in another tablet we'll see later, it's possible that they had to make a course correction and that they knew about the asteroid belt as well. And that leads to this. Now, this is called Cylinder Seal VA243. This is in the Pergamon Museum. It's in Germany. It used to be East Germany. It's one of the most important seals on planet Earth. It shows Enki and another god. The gods have horned hats. And how do you know they're gods? Is they usually have horned hats or they're elevated. In this case, on a chair. Notice one thing. Enki is as high as these other guys, but he's seated. If he was to stand up, he would be about this tall. He would be gigantic. Second, we know how old this is because this is Akkadian cuneiform script. This is 2500 BC. So it's 4,500 years ago, this tablet. This is showing, commemorating the plow being given to mankind. Notice the arm movements over here. They're giving. You see the shape of giving? They're giving the plow to mankind. Here's a human. So in this culture, they didn't claim credit for creating the plow. They said, oh, our gods did it. And what you get with the Sumerian, Mesopotamian tablets and the other type of type 1 data is you get a visual picture, visual representation, and you also get a text which will describe the story. You get both forms of data. But what we're going to look at is right here. Something very unusual to be depicted 4,500 years ago. Now, usually I ask most people to say, what do you see in the center of this object? The sun. When I was in school, I was not taught that the ancients knew the sun was in the center of the solar system. I was taught that humans thought that the earth was the center of everything. Until Copernicus proved it on his deathbed and got published, and then Galileo got sent to house imprisonment for proving that objects move around other bodies. Here's a depiction, older than any history, that shows the sun in the center. Other things you see, this is a 6-pointed star, which is usually called the Star of David. When I was a child and I used to draw the sun, I used to draw rays coming off the sun. It's very childlike, yet it has information that should not exist. Now there's 12 objects here, and I'll tell you again, here's that number 12. Why is there 12 objects? They used to represent every god with an astronomical object. So we have the Earth and the Moon, because gods were represented by the Moon and the Earth. Mercury and Venus. Now again, remember, we're not going to scale. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Jupiter here, Mars here, and an extra planet here. Now what we have here now is the asteroid belt. So between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt now, but this depiction is showing that there's a planet there. So we think that this is the original orbital path of Nibiru, that extra planet that their gods said they came from. And now there's debris left in that orbital path. So once again, now Pluto was not even discovered until the 1930s. Uranus and Neptune were discovered in the 1840s to 1870s. And this is showing every object in the solar system that we know of today, 4,500 years ago. And again, this is type 1 data. Any of you can go to the Pergamon Museum in Germany and see it for yourself and try to figure it out. Is this true or not? Well, I know the piece exists. There's a picture of it. But many people, if you're going to take a trip, go see it for yourself. That's the type of data we're looking at, stuff that anybody can examine for themselves. Zacharias had an argument with an astronomer regarding the definition and the description of this piece here. And this astronomer first said in a magazine, oh, it's not showing our solar system, he's depicting another solar system. And Zachariah wrote on the caption, he goes, wow, is he saying that the ancients now knew about other solar systems out beyond our own? Our modern astronomers have only discovered other solar systems in the last 2 to 3 decades, even though they theorized they existed. So then the astronomer said, okay, I was too hasty. Maybe it's showing Jupiter in the constellation of the Teapot. Well, the Teapot is a constellation that was created by British astronomers because they used to have afternoon tea. The Teapot was never discovered by Mesopotamian or Akkadian astronomers. And so he said, okay, that probably is not right either. And Jupiter never is in the Teapot. The observation doesn't exist. They're in the wrong lineup. So the only final explanation is very simple. Now, I'm not saying that every citizen of Sumeria or Akkadian Empire knew what this information was, but 2 did. 1, potentially a god with a small g, an alien or a godlike being, and then the scribe who was told by the god what to put into the picture or what the knowledge was. This was not public knowledge that everyone knew. This was stuff that the high priest knew. This was the sacred knowledge. This was the secret stuff. And now we go to what I consider one of the most important pieces on planet Earth. This is in the British Museum. It's in a permanent display. This is called the planisphere. Now we're going to look at a sketch in a second. This is a round disc with a lot of different things going on. We'll see the sketch, it'll be clear, but I just want to point out this. This here looks like it's been bubbled or melted. This here is like really smooth, and none of it shows burn marks. So the piece is in a very strange condition nowadays. Okay? Notice this cuneiform, you're going to see it right here. This is Zechariah's sketch, which is in his book, The 12th Planet, and other books. Now we're going to talk about what are in the individual pieces here. First of all, this shows the shape of an ellipse. An ellipse is not a circle. An ellipse is the true path of planets around the sun. Kepler was the one who discovered the true orbital path. An ellipse has double foci. There's two focuses of gravity that pull at it, and that's shown here. This shape should not exist. Here we have what looks like Orion, and here we have an arrow pointing here. Here we have 3 intersecting lines, and we have an arrow pointing here. And here, we're going to actually look at this whole slice, but let me talk about this and this. To navigate in space, to navigate in a 3-dimensional space condition, you need 7 points, 7 coordinates. You need a starting point. Let's say me here. I'm here. I want to go there. How do I get there? I have to connect 1 star here, 1 star here, draw a line. I make a star here, make a star here, make another line. I connect another 2. I have 6 coordinates, and I draw 3 intersecting lines. So for me going to there, I need to have 7 coordinates. 6 there and 1 here. Or I'm coming from there and going here, which just reverses it. And that's what you're showing, that's what's being displayed here on a 2-dimensional surface. They are showing 3-dimensional space travel. Here's one section, and this here, section here, and section here, and more descriptions, and they're intersecting the lines, and this is the originating point, or that's the destination point. They're showing 3-dimensional navigation on a 2-dimensional surface. And this is not the only piece on Earth that's like this. Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, was on the radio with Zechariah and said that he also found evidence of this in a dig in Mexico of 3-dimensional navigation on a 2-dimensional surface. But we haven't seen that. That was held back by the Mexican authorities. So even this is a unique piece. This is on permanent display in the British Museum. And when I was there, I talked to the security guard. I go, "You stand there all day long. Do you actually know what you're standing in front of?" And he's like, "Nope, I have no idea." I'm like, "You really don't." So now we're going to look at this piece of the puzzle here. This piece of the pie, is actually describing a journey from another planet to our planet here on Earth. First, you have like these directions and different things around the outside. We'll start with that. Kakab Anu. In Sumerian, Kakab is an astronomical object. In Hebrew, Kohav is star. So Kakab maintains itself, the sound, and then becomes Kohav. But they use Kakab as any astronomical object. So Kakab Anu meant some astronomical object in the heavens. And then you have some instructions here, hi, 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 rock the rocket pilot. Now in here you have the deity Enlil, means the god Enlil, went by the planets. And he came from, we think that this means a mountainous planet. They came this way, they made a course correction between Kakab, Dilgon, and Kakab Apin. We think it's Mars and Jupiter. So now watch how many planets he came by. Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. They called Earth the 7th planet. And they depicted Earth with 7 dots. For many decades, the 7 dots was misinterpreted as being the Pleiades or 7 sisters. Zechariah Sitchin is the one who figured out that from the outside coming in, they would call Earth the 7th. And that's why, they did show 7 dots depicted all the time. Now over here, you see that we're the 3rd rock from the sun. The sun, Mercury, Venus, and Earth. And then you have the Way of Enlil. And the Way of Enlil is the sky of the Earth. So this is showing in a single picture a space journey from outside of our solar system, going by our planets, making a course correction which we think is at the asteroid belt, and then landing on the 3rd planet from the sun. And then the text described a splashdown in the Persian Gulf waters, them coming out, exploring different paths, creating canals, and doing all these operations. So there's visual evidence and there's textual evidence, and the stories back it up. Now some of you may not be able to see this over here. This is from the Tomb of Hoi in Egypt. This is showing what looks like a rocket, basically, a rocket with an above ground, like an Apollo module, and a below ground. First of all, there's two guys down here doing maintenance with hoses and doing work. This looks like technology being shown. Up here is what looks like a heat shield with straps on it, and there's marks on it, so it's not pristine, it's not shown perfect, it's depicted as something used. The people are praying around this object, but they're not praying to the object. They are focusing away from the object. So now, instead of just the knowledge of astronomy, zodiac, and mathematics, not just the knowledge of the description of traveling, now we're seeing physical depictions, visual forms of technology. Things that the ancient people recorded of what their gods were doing. It's simply what they saw, so they draw the picture. Okay? Even the giraffes here, which are unusual, are facing away. This is a holy object, and you shouldn't even look at it. Here, it looks like it is dispensation for rocket exhaust. In other words, if an underground rocket takes off, the exhaust has to go somewhere. And it looks like we have here absorbing tiles and things like this. Now, if that's what they depict, and this is what we have, okay. Obviously, it seems crazy. You know, we're talking about rocket ships, technology. These are not UFO technology. We're talking about fuel-based technology coming to Earth from another planet, which happens to be in our solar system, not from a different star system. So I was asking myself, okay, pictures is one thing, but all this evidence has also descriptions. So is there a description of this type of event? I mean, we're talking about, you know, to get out of Earth's atmosphere, you need to have escape velocity, 6 miles a second. You have to fly, you have to travel. I mean, it's huge amounts of thrust and force. Okay? Did somebody record some type of event that can match this depiction? The answer is actually yes. We have a description in text form from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest literary tale we have complete evidence for. 16 tablets big, found in multiple cultures, copied almost exactly word for word. And here's what Gilgamesh saw. He thinks he's having a dream. He's talking to his friend Enkidu, his best friend. And he's saying, the heavens cried out, earth roared, daylight vanished, and darkness issued forth. Lightning flashed, fire broke out. Clouds swelled, it rained death. The glow disappeared, the fire went out, and all that had fallen turned to ashes. Now, if we were watching a rocket launch, that's exactly the description that we would give it. If we didn't understand the technology, fire and brimstone, we've heard stuff like this from the Bible, darkness, flashing, and then ashes. And it matches everything that you would see here, in order of the events occurring. So that's what's so incredible about this material, is you don't just get the depiction, you get also a textual description. And I gotta tell you something, Gilgamesh is one of the sources for so much of our biblical information. Gilgamesh was the first character in history who claimed to be a hybrid. He was two-thirds divine. His mother was a goddess, his father was a priest king. So he was the first being who was not completely human, but partially divine. Later on, besides the mythological religious stories, pharaohs of Egypt had to claim divinity from a god to be able to rule. Gilgamesh was the first. Gilgamesh will also, you'll see soon, he'll be involved in another biblical story. So again, I ask myself the question, okay, depictions of rockets, advanced mathematics, okay, they gotta land somewhere, right? And where are they taking off from? Where are they landing? Is there evidence that they physically existed on the Earth? And once again, the answer is yes. This is from Baalbek, Lebanon. This is the biggest cut stone in the world. Now, when you look at pictures of pyramids and stuff, they're puny. This is 30 people standing in front of one stone. It's the size of this room. And this stone is in Baalbek, Lebanon. It's always existed there. Throughout history, Baalbek has been there. There's never been a time, there's actually no stories of them building Baalbek. The locals just say the giant gods built it. Well, I gotta tell you something. Is it possible that humans will be working with stones this big? You can't even move it today. It weighs 1,100 tons. And by the way, this is 1.5 miles away from where it's put in place. This is the quarry. And the site that exists in the Baalbek temple, it's actually up here. And then here's a guy over here. Look how small he is, right? That giant stone, there's 3 of them called the trilithon. Up here The third level up. Now this stone's maybe humans would deal with this size, possibly. These are even bigger. This is 3 of those gigantic stones that 30 people in front of, weigh 1,100 tons. Even today we can't move it around. We can just lift it up and lift it down. But it's still there, halfway cut into the ground in perfect shape and perfect form. So now we have sort of an explanation of, it coalesces into the different types of evidence. The textual, the visual, the memory, the description, and an old Phoenician coin, which we think this is showing what that Baalbek site looked like with its actual rocket ship still standing on the platform. This is a raised platform, and in this site was where, in Baalbek, Lebanon, by the way, nobody can go there now because there's a terrorist base from Hezbollah there now. Zechariah was able to get a trip there like last decade in the 90s when there was a peace treaty for a short time. But the Romans built the biggest temple that they had to Jupiter. The temple was to Jupiter. The biggest temple in their empire was built on that site. And what the Romans did was they adopted ancient sites that were popular. They took them over and they built their stuff on it. And that one in Baalbek was the biggest one that they ever built. Okay, it may be hard for some people to see this, but oh boy, yeah, it's a little difficult. Okay, what you're looking at is now the pictograph of the word Dingir. And Dingir means holy ones of the gear. This little gear object. This actually looks like a 2-stage rocket ship sideways. The problem is that that's the first time that the word God was mistranslated. Dingir, the word din is like mujahideen, holy warrior, or in Hebrew, Beit Din, which means house of judgment or justice. So what you're seeing is the first time that the word for God appeared in pictographic writing, it looked like a 2-stage rocket, and the next time it was translated was wrong. It was translated incorrectly. Now, the word gear here at the bottom means flashy, fiery lightning. So that word for God actually meant holy ones of the flashy, fiery object. Now I'm going to go a little bit quickly here. This is a little rocket ship object that was found in Turkey 15 feet beneath the ground that Zechariah was instrumental in getting the curator of the museum to have put out on display because it was found in his drawer and the guy thought it was a fake, even though they were the ones who dug it up. This is the sketch of what this is, and Zach also shows a little space shuttle by it. So what happens is, since the curator could not find anything that was like that, he thought, oh, how could my museum put up an original? That doesn't make sense. So he convinced him by sending the curator other objects that look similar to display this. And they do display this in the Turkey Museum, and they have a little note that we think it's a fake. A fake that was found 15 feet below the ground because, of course, he couldn't believe that anything that was space-related existed in ancient times. And this is how some of the word progressions occurred. The word Dengir meant holy ones, righteous ones of the gear. There was 2 types of gods of the Sumerians. They called them Anunnaki, which meant those who to heaven and earth came, and Igigi is watchers. These will appear in Hebrew later on, and you're going to see the next slide. Dingir shows up as a mistranslation the next time it's generated into Ilil, Ilani, and Aluti, which means lofty ones or gods. So the first time this pictograph is translated, it's mistranslated. Then it turns into Hebrew as El, Eloha, Elohim, Elohim being a plural word. And then in the Bible you have words that are B'nai Elohim, which are children of the gods. So the Dingir pictograph of a 2-stage rocket becomes the original form of the word gods. I know I'm going quick, but on the video you can see it very in detail. The word Anunnaki, those who from heaven and earth came. Enki was the chief, that's one of the Anunnaki. Hebrew picks up the word Anunnaki, changes it to Anak, Anaki, or Anakim, which means giant. So Hebrew's word for giant, Anakim, is from the sound of the Sumerian name for their gods. Now the word term for fallen angels or fallen ones is what Anunnaki means, those who have fallen down. Hebrew picks that up as the word Nephilim, fallen ones. In Aramaic, Nephila is also giant, the word for giant, which is also why there was mistranslated for many years, there were giants in the earth in those days. And Rephaim is a term of a type of giant mentioned in the Bible, that's the word for ghost right now in Hebrew. So Hebrew picks up 2 different types of the word of Anunnaki. One is the sound, and one is the meaning. Fallen ones for them is Nephilim, and the sound remains Anak, Anakim. Forget about the vowels, just think about the consonants. For thousands of years, Anunnaki becomes and gets changed into Anakim. That's how accents change. And over thousands of years of repeating these stories, this is how the knowledge is transferred down. Okay, if you can see this, this is showing their creation story of the first time the human was created, us. What's happening is actually you're looking at a laboratory scene. Notice, now we know this is Enki from the textual description. He's holding a test tube. On the wall is flasks, and here's a guy mixing this mixture, which is what they said how we were created, with a mixture of clay and blood and other things that happen, which, by the way, is the same as the biblical story. Okay? God formed us from the dust of the ground, which is, in Hebrew, all of those words come from the term for man. It's hard to explain in a quick form, but here. And here, Ninti, the goddess of life, who also was later translated as Rib and life, were mistranslated. This is why Rib ends up in the Bible. The woman comes from Adam. She's holding up the first baby and the first model man, and in the text it says, "My hands have made it, I have created it." Now, I didn't bring the text in, but I wanted to show you how, look at the laboratory scene this is. This test tube here, this is like a modern, it's a simple sketch drawing, but of a laboratory, and it's extremely old. Okay, here we are in the first biblical passage we have. I hope we can get through these. This is after the flood. After the flood that Noah had, and the whole flood destroyed the earth and everything, animals, Noah took all the animals. Noah gives a sacrifice to God. And it says here that God, so this just says the word Hashem. In this Bible, they don't use the word God, which would be Yahweh. They use Hashem, which means the name. So God smelled a pleasing aroma. And he enjoyed the smell of the sacrifice being cooked, which doesn't seem to make sense for the biblical creator God. But when you know where the original form of the story came from, you can see. This is from Atrahasis. Atrahasis is the same as Noah, the character who survived the flood. He's known by many names. Over here, the gods smelt the fragrance, gathered like flies over the offering, and they had eaten the offering. So in the older form of the story of the survival of the flood, it wasn't the God of the Bible who smelled the sacrifice or gave the order to build the ark or to actually create the flood. In this case, it was the gods Enlil and those group of gods. Along with that, there's more details that show up. In this story, the gods are weeping for the humans that were dying. They were not happy. They were above the ground, seeing what was going on. They were thirsty. They were filled with grief. They had dry lips. They didn't have enough supplies. And for 7 days, the flood came upon. Also, the story is in Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh and Atrahasis. Gilgamesh, the character that he meets, is called Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim is also the character of Noah, who was told to build an ark and to save his family and save the animals. And again, the gods smelt the fragrance, the gods smelt the pleasing fragrance, and gathered like flies over the offering. Here, the story of the dove is released first, then there's a swallow and then the raven in the biblical story. The dove is the last bird to go out, who doesn't come back until they know there's dry waters. So it's easy to see where the story of Noah was borrowed from. You can find the originals. And here's the Tower of Babel story, another one that's borrowed, okay? When they migrated from the east, they found the land in the valley land of Shinar, which is Sumer. They said, let us break bricks, burn fire, let us build a tower with its top to heaven. And what happens is, the land is with one language, and God says, come, let us descend and confuse their language, they should not understand one another's language. There's a lot of details in here, but I want to show you the copy of where it comes from. The Sumerian originals here, this is from Samuel Noah Kramer's book again. It says here, Harmony Tongue Sumer, the great land of the bee. Harmony Tongue means the land of one language. So here we have another example of the Tower of Babel story, which is borrowed. To Enlil in one tongue gave speech. In their history, Enlil gave language, not the God of the Bible, Yahweh. And down here, change the speech in their mouths, put contention into it, into the speech of man, and until that time had been one language. So down here, we have an example of the Sumerian original in the Tower of Babel. Okay, here's the birth story of Moses. The birth story of Moses is also borrowed. Moses was not the first character in history to be put in a basket, covered with pitch, left to float in a river, and found to be and raised to be the king. That was Sargon, the great king of Acadia. And that's the birth story. I know I'm going fast here, but I have to go through these. Okay, here's the first plague of Egypt. Aaron and Moses turned the rivers to blood. They could drink nothing but blood, and everything was turned, the whole Nile River was turned to blood. Guess what? It's not an original biblical story. Once again, it's Inanna Ishtar. All the wells of the land she filled with blood, all the groves and gardens of the land she filled with blood, that people could drink nothing but blood. Inanna Ishtar turned the river to blood before the Bible, biblical did too. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the Book of Giants, the Dead Sea Scrolls is 150 BC to about 70 AD. And there's Gilgamesh mentioned in here. Now, Gilgamesh is from 2500 BC to 3500 BC. It's thousands of years earlier. And here, the Dead Sea Scrolls has got Gilgamesh mentioned. And this should not exist. In fact, when the first version of the Dead Sea Scrolls was released, they didn't even release this fragment. This was released in the second version. The complete Dead Sea Scrolls was not even complete. So now we see a form of the Sumerian story, Gilgamesh, the hero king, showing up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, by the way, Dead Sea Scrolls is one of those examples of how the modern version of the Bible we have is the current version at least to 2,000 years ago. Here's the Hebrew months that the Jews use today, borrowed from Babylon. In the Bible, all the months are labeled, the first month, the seventh month, etc. They picked up all the months. Nisan became Nisan, Sivan was Sivan. So when the Jews came back the Israelites came back from exile, they picked up the Babylonian months and a whole bunch of these other stories which were eventually incorporated into the Bible. Okay. All right. I've never done a 1-hour lecture before. It usually takes me 2 hours and 10 minutes to do the full material. Okay, this is some of Zechariah's books. There's a lot of them. Bottom line stories here. The stories of the Bible are borrowed. The mythological stories, borrowed. Literary borrowing has been going on for thousands of years. That doesn't destroy or reduce the foundation of the messages of the Bible, the moral lessons, the good ideas, the ways of living your life, honoring your father and mother, treating your brother as yourself, honoring the planet, taking care of people that need it. It just shows you that the original form of, if the belief is based on the stories, there's a problem there. If the belief and the way of living your life is based on the good ideals, then you have no problem. Okay, there's a lot of material to study. It literally takes hours to go through all of the details. There's videos for sale in the back. There's a t-shirt for sale. And if you guys want to spend more time to do more research on it, then you